Clint Eastwood's latest film shoot took an unexpected turn when Border Patrol agents intercepted drug smugglers nearby. The 92-year-old actor's response to this real-life drama has sparked intense debate across America. As tension mounted on set, Eastwood's personal history with migrant workers added complexity to the unfolding situation. The incident has reignited discussions about immigration, drug policy, and celebrity influence on social issues. What exactly transpired in those tense moments? Eastwood's actions have left the nation divided, forcing Americans to confront deep-seated beliefs about today's most contentious topics. The full story reveals a side of Clint Eastwood that few have seen before. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty film set, its rays glinting off camera equipment. Clint Eastwood stood at the edge of the action, his weathered face creased in concentration. The crew moved with relaxed efficiency, the air humming with low conversations and occasional laughter. Clint nodded approvingly, still finding joy in the controlled chaos after decades in the business. Suddenly, a shift in the atmosphere caught his attention. A distant commotion drew eyes away from the set. Whispers rippled through the group, growing more urgent. Clint's eyes narrowed, his instincts telling him this was no part of the script. He moved closer to investigate, the crunch of his boots echoing in the growing tension. Fragments of worried conversation reached his ears. "Did you see that? Are those Border Patrol vehicles? What's going on out there?" Clint's gaze swept across the horizon, landing on a convoy of green and white vehicles speeding towards an unseen target. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation. He stood rooted to the spot, mind racing. This isolated location, chosen for its rugged beauty, was becoming the stage for real-life drama. As the Border Patrol drew nearer, Clint's keen eyes picked out details. They surrounded a group of migrants who looked exhausted and frightened. But there was more. As agents searched the group, their movements became focused and intense. Drugs emerged from hidden compartments, and the gravity of the situation sank in. These weren't simple border crossers, but unwilling participants in a dangerous world of trafficking. Clint felt a tangle of emotions. Compassion for those driven to such desperation warred with his sense of law and order. He'd played both hero and outlaw on screen, but the complexity of real life defied easy categorization. These weren't the clear-cut villains of his films, but human beings caught in a web of poverty and exploitation. His gaze shifted to his crew, seeing shock and uncertainty on their faces. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the raw reality before them. Others couldn't tear their eyes from the scene, captivated by its stark humanity. Standing between two worlds, his films manufactured reality and the harsh truth of life on the border. Clint felt a decision forming. He was more than just an actor or director. He was a witness to a human crisis unfolding. The question wasn't whether to act, but how. Clint Eastwood's heart pounded in his chest, a stark contrast to the controlled demeanor he'd maintained throughout his illustrious career. The scene before him blurred the lines between the fictional worlds he'd created and the harsh reality unfolding just beyond the camera's reach. Border Patrol agents moved with practiced efficiency, their stern faces a mask of professionalism as they processed the group of migrants caught in a web of desperation and illicit activity. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Clint's shoulders, heavier than any role he'd ever assumed. As his gaze swept over the scene, he couldn't help but notice the fear etched into the migrants' faces. Their eyes told stories of hardship, of dreams deferred, of families left behind in search of something better. A young woman clutched a small child to her chest, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Suddenly, Clint was transported back to his youth in California. He remembered working alongside migrant laborers in the scorching sun, their calloused hands deftly plucking fruit from laden branches. The camaraderie, the shared meals, the stories of home, it all came flooding back. The memory faded, leaving Clint to confront the present reality. The Border Patrol agents, with their crisp uniforms and stoic expressions, represented a different world entirely. One agent methodically processed paperwork, while another kept a watchful eye on the group, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Clint's mind raced through the potential consequences of intervention. Would he be lauded as a hero or vilified as a meddling celebrity? Would his actions make a difference or merely complicate an already delicate situation? He recalled the criticisms often lobbed at Hollywood elites who dared to meddle in real-world issues. But then, in a moment of clarity, Clint's path forward suddenly crystallized. He realized that the true measure of a person isn't found in the roles they play or the accolades they receive, but in the choices they make when faced with difficult decisions. With determination in his eyes, Clint strode towards the unfolding scene. His steps were measured, purposeful, each one carrying the weight of his decision. As he approached, he could feel the eyes of his crew boring into his back, could almost hear the collective intake of breath as they waited to see what would happen next. The air crackled with tension as Clint reached the group. He locked eyes with a young Border Patrol agent, her gaze questioning but not hostile. Taking a deep breath, Clint prepared to bridge the gap between two worlds, hoping that the wisdom gained from a lifetime of storytelling could somehow make a difference in this all-too-real drama. The air crackled with tension as Clint Eastwood approached the scene. Border Patrol agents shifted uneasily, while migrants huddled together, fear etched across their faces. The film crew held their breath, capturing a moment that blurred the lines between Hollywood drama and harsh reality. Clint's weathered boots kicked up dust with each step. A young officer stepped forward, asking Clint to step back from the active operation. Clint paused, his gaze sweeping over the scene. "I understand," he replied, his voice low and gravelly, "but we need to look at the bigger picture here." The officer's brow furrowed. "Sir, these individuals were caught smuggling drugs. The law is clear." Clint held up a hand. "The law might be clear, son, but life rarely is." He turned to the migrants, his eyes softening. "I've played many roles, but today I'm just a man trying to understand other human beings." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The film crew exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "These people are mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters," Clint continued. "They're human beings caught in a web of desperation and exploitation." The Border Patrol agents shifted uncomfortably. Clint turned to the migrants. "I want to hear your stories, not as a celebrity, but as one human being to another." A woman stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "Senor, we did not want this. The cartels threatened our families. We had no choice." As she spoke, Clint listened intently. The Border Patrol agents found themselves drawn in, their stern facades cracking as they heard tales of families torn apart by violence and poverty. With each story, the atmosphere shifted. The line between law enforcers and lawbreakers blurred, replaced by a shared understanding of human suffering and resilience. The lead agent, a grizzled veteran, stepped forward. His eyes held a mix of conflict and compassion. "Mr. Eastwood," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "in all my years, I've never... This changes things." Clint nodded, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Sometimes the right thing isn't always what's in the rulebook. Your duty is to protect and serve all human beings, not just those born on one side of a line drawn in the sand." The young officer who had first confronted Clint now stood silently, his earlier certainty replaced by thoughtful consideration. The other agents exchanged glances, their rigid postures softening as they processed the stories they'd heard. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, the scene had transformed. What began as a routine arrest had become a moment of profound connection, challenging long-held beliefs and opening hearts to the complex realities of human migration. The desert sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Clint Eastwood's words lingered in the air, challenging everyone to see beyond the black and white of law and morality. The Border Patrol agents shifted uncomfortably, their training at odds with the unexpected turn of events. The migrants watched with a mixture of hope and wariness. Clint spoke again, his voice low and gravelly. "I've spent my life telling stories, some about lawmen, others about outlaws, but the real stories, the ones that matter, are about the people caught in between." The film crew watched in awe, cameras rolling, capturing a moment that transcended their original purpose. Clint continued, "Years ago, I met a farmer near the border who told me about the people crossing his land. He spoke of fathers trying to feed their family, these mothers hoping to give their children a better life." The lead Border Patrol agent, a grizzled veteran, found himself nodding. He'd witnessed the human cost of policies firsthand. Clint's eyes softened as he turned to the migrants. "I can't imagine the circumstances that led you here, but I want you to know that you're seen. Your stories matter." A woman in the group, her face etched with worry, met Clint's gaze. Tears welled in her eyes, acknowledging the unexpected compassion. Addressing the Border Patrol agents, Clint said, "You're not villains. You're doing a tough job. But today, I'm asking you to remember that behind every law, there's a human story." The young officer who had first confronted Clint spoke up about protocols and regulations. Clint held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to ignore your duty. I'm asking you to expand it, to see that sometimes the most powerful act of service is to listen. A gentle breeze swept across the desert, carrying the weight of countless untold stories. The Border Patrol agents exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The migrants straightened slightly, hope kindling in their eyes. The grizzled veteran stepped forward. "Mr. Eastwood, this changes things. We can't just let them go, but maybe we can make sure their stories are heard. Maybe we can address the root causes, not just the symptoms." Clint nodded. "Sometimes the most powerful act is to listen." He turned to the migrants. "Your journey doesn't end here, but maybe it can take a different path." As the sun dipped lower, a sense of shared humanity emerged. The rigid lines between law enforcers and lawbreakers blurred, replaced by a growing understanding of the complex tapestry of human experience. This moment held the potential to ripple outward, challenging long-held beliefs and sparking conversations far beyond the border. As the group stood together, the weight of what had transpired settled upon them, a catalyst for change in a world desperate for compassion and understanding. As the warm glow of the desert sunset faded, the impact of Clint Eastwood's unexpected intervention began to ripple outward. The film crew, still stunned by what they had witnessed, hurriedly packed up their equipment, their original shoot all but forgotten. Within hours, the first reports hit social media, grainy cell phone footage capturing the moment the Hollywood legend stepped between Border Patrol agents and a group of desperate migrants. The story exploded overnight, dominating headlines and sparking heated debates across the nation. In Washington, D.C., politicians scrambled to stake their positions, while the film industry grappled with the sudden controversy surrounding one of its most iconic figures. Clint himself remained largely out of sight, but not entirely silent. A close friend reported that the actor seemed both surprised and moved by the reaction to his actions. "He didn't set out to make a statement," the friend confided. "He just saw people in need and acted on instinct." As the media frenzy continued, real change was taking root in the dusty border town. The local community, inspired by Clint's act of compassion, began to mobilize. Retired teachers started offering free English classes to migrant families. Local business owners, many of whom had initially viewed the migrants with suspicion, began to offer job training and employment opportunities. Even the Border Patrol saw shifts in attitude. Officer Rodriguez, the young agent who had first confronted Clint, requested a transfer to a community outreach unit. "I joined the force to protect people," he explained. "I'm starting to see that protection can take many forms." The migrants' stories of hardship, of hope, of the lengths humans will go to for a chance at a better life, began to resonate beyond sensational headlines. Their legal cases moved forward, ensuring fair hearings and access to representation. 3 months after that fateful day in the desert, a small gathering took place at a community center near the border. Clint Eastwood, looking older and more thoughtful than his tough guy image had ever allowed, sat at a table surrounded by an unlikely group: Border Patrol agents, local activists, and several of the migrants whose lives he had touched that day. As they shared a simple meal, the rigid lines that had once divided them seemed to blur and soften. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. The issues remained complex and unresolved. But in that room on that night, a small miracle had occurred. People who once saw each other as enemies now broke bread as friends. The community center gathering had been a moment of connection, but for Clint Eastwood, it marked the beginning of a profound personal journey. As he drove home that night, he felt a strange mixture of elation and unease. The rigid lines he'd lived by for so long had begun to blur, leaving him in unfamiliar territory. For days, Clint sequestered himself in his Carmel home, grappling with the weight of his decision to intervene at the border. Memories of past roles flooded his mind, blending with the reality of what he'd just experienced. He'd played so many lawmen, delivered so many lines about justice, but now those scripted words felt hollow compared to the raw humanity he'd witnessed in the desert. As news spread, letters began to arrive. Each envelope contained a story that chipped away at Clint's long-held assumptions. A mother wrote of her son, left behind when she fled violence. A young man described withering crops that drove him north, seeking work to support aging parents. With each letter, the migrants became Maria, Jorge, Luisa, human beings caught in circumstances beyond their control. One morning, as Clint watched the fog roll in from the Pacific, a memory surfaced. Years ago, on a film set in Arizona, he'd met an old rancher who lived right on the border. The man had shown Clint a collection of personal items he'd found on his land backpacks, water bottles, family photos, left behind by those crossing under cover of darkness. Each one of these, the rancher had said, his voice heavy with emotion, is someone's story, someone's hope. At the time, Clint hadn't fully grasped the weight of those words. Now they hit him with the force of revelation. He realized that his entire career, his public image, even his understanding of himself, had been built on a foundation that was beginning to crack. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. At 92, Clint felt a renewed sense of purpose. He'd spent decades telling stories on screen, but now he understood that the most powerful stories were unfolding in real life, just beyond the edges of his comfortable world. As the fog began to lift, Clint made a decision. He wouldn't hide from the controversy his actions had sparked. Instead, he would use his platform to shine a light on the human stories behind the headlines. It wouldn't be easy. He knew he'd face backlash, criticism from old allies, maybe even damage to his career. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, driven by a mission larger than himself. Clint picked up his phone, fingers hovering over the keypad for a moment before dialing his agent. It was time to face the public, to share what he'd learned, and to use his voice in ways he never had before. As he waited for the call to connect, Clint's mind drifted back to that dusty afternoon in the desert. He'd stepped into that situation on instinct, never imagining how it would change him. The Sierra Grill hummed with anticipation as Clint Eastwood stepped onto the makeshift stage. Camera flashes illuminated his weathered face, capturing a hint of vulnerability in his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. At 92, he still commanded the room, but there was an undeniable weight to his presence. "I've spent my whole life telling stories," Clint began, his voice gruff but steady. "Today, I'm here to share a different kind of tale, one that's forced me to question everything I thought I knew about justice, compassion, and what it means to be an American." The audience leaned in, a mix of supporters and skeptics hanging on his every word. Clint recounted his experience in the desert, his words painting a vivid picture of desperation and humanity. "I saw fear in their eyes," he said, "but also a hope so powerful it drove them to risk everything." As he spoke, a palpable shift occurred in the room. Some nodded in understanding, while others frowned, struggling to reconcile this new Clint with their long-held image of him. "I've played a lot of heroes," Clint continued, a wry smile tugging at his mouth. "But real heroism isn't about being tough or uncompromising. It's about having the courage to see the humanity in others, even when it's easier to look away." He pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. This belonged to a different Clint Eastwood, a young man who spent summers working in migrant labor camps, forming deep connections with families seeking a better life. Gasps rippled through the audience, casting his recent actions in a new light. Clint's passion grew as he outlined his plans for future involvement. "I can't change the past," he declared, "but I can use whatever influence I have left to shine a light on the human stories behind the headlines. To remind us all that compassion isn't weakness, it's the very foundation of true strength." He concluded with a challenge. "Examine your own beliefs and biases. Ask yourself if you're truly seeing the humanity in those different from you." The air crackled with a sense of possibility as conversations erupted throughout the room. As Clint stepped down, he was met with a mix of applause and intense discussion. He knew his words would be dissected, his motives questioned, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. At 92, he had found the courage to live authentically, challenging not just his own legacy, but our collective assumptions about identity and change. Clint Eastwood's unexpected intervention at the border sparked a national conversation about compassion, justice, and challenging our beliefs. His journey from tough guy icon to advocate for empathy reminded us that it's never too late to make a difference. As the dust settled on this extraordinary chapter, viewers were left with a profound question. What role might we play in shaping a more just and compassionate society? Eastwood's actions serve as a powerful reminder that true heroism often lies in quiet moments of human connection. In our next video, we'll explore another surprising act of kindness from an unlikely source. Join us as we uncover how Sylvester Stallone's gesture on a flight turned into an unforgettable moment for one deserving veteran. What unexpected twist awaits? Stay tuned to find out.